The first time Gunnery Sergeant Harold Decker realized his new neighbor was going to be a problem, she was parked in the middle of his driveway, engines still running, leaning on her car horn like the street owed her an apology. It was a Wednesday morning in March 2019. Harold had a 7 a.m. doctor's appointment. He'd been awake since 4:30, the way old Marines tend to be. He walked out his front door in his pressed khakis, coffee in hand, and stopped cold on the top porch step. There she was, a pearl-white 2020 BMW X5, parked sideways across his concrete driveway, not just nudging the edge but dead center, blocking his entire path like his property line was an inconvenience she hadn't gotten around to noticing yet. Harold set down his coffee. He didn't yell, he didn't wave his arms, he just looked at the car for a long, quiet moment. That was the beginning. But it wasn't the end. Not even close. Let me tell you about Cedarwood Cove. It's a neighborhood tucked along the western edge of Carteret County, North Carolina, close enough to Beaufort that you can smell the salt on a still morning, far enough from the tourist traffic that the streets stay quiet. A place where people know each other's dogs by name, where someone's kid leaves their bicycle on the sidewalk overnight and it's still there in the morning. Pinecrest Loop is the street that matters here. 14 houses, mature oak trees that go 60 feet up and shade the whole road in summer, concrete driveways with basketball hoops, American flags on most of the posts, sprinklers clicking on at 6:15 in the morning when the dew is still on the grass. In the spring and summer it smells like honeysuckle and cut grass. In the fall it smells like wood smoke. In winter the street goes quieter than a church. The neighbors on Pinecrest Loop were not perfect people. They were real people. Retirees who argued about HOA paint colors, families with loud children, a couple of guys with too many cars in the yard, but they were good to each other. They kept their fences straight and their yards clean, and when someone got sick there was a casserole on the porch by sundown. This was the street Harold Decker had lived on for 19 years. This was the street that was about to be disrupted. Gunnery Sergeant Harold Thomas Decker, United States Marine Corps, retired. Born February 12, 1953, in Kannapolis, North Carolina. Enlisted at 17 with his mother's reluctant signature. Graduated top of his class at Paris Island in 1971. Served 26 years. First stationed in Okinawa, Japan. Then Camp Lejeune right here in North Carolina, which is how he fell in love with the coast. Deployed twice to the Persian Gulf. Served one tour in Somalia. Retired in 1997 at the rank of Gunnery Sergeant, a rank that in the Marine Corps means something. It means you are the backbone. The institutional memory, the man the lieutenants quietly defer to even when they outrank you. Harold came home to Carteret County because his wife Margaret had grown up here. They built a house on Pinecrest Loop in 2000, white clapboard siding, a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, a flagpole in the yard where he raised and lowered the stars and stripes by hand every single day, up at sunrise, down at dusk, never missed. Margaret died of ovarian cancer in 2014. Harold had been caring for her full-time for 2 years before that, driving her to every treatment, sleeping in a chair next to her hospital bed whenever they admitted her. After she was gone, he kept raising the flag. He still had the rocking chairs on the porch, both of them, because getting rid of one felt like giving up on something he wasn't ready to give up on. His neighbors adored him. He fixed a leaky pipe for the Garza family at number 7 without being asked. He'd spent an entire Saturday in 2017 helping a young couple at number 11 move in, carrying boxes in the July heat, refusing $1 in return. He had a workshop in his garage, woodworking mostly, and he carved name signs for half the kids on the block as birthday presents. Each one hand-painted, each one spelled perfectly. He walked with a slight hitch in his left knee, a souvenir from 1991 that no surgery had fully fixed. In the mornings, before the joint loosened up, he moved slowly. He didn't complain about it. He had a cat too, an orange tabby named Corporal. Corporal was 12 years old, half-blind, and the only one allowed to sleep on Margaret's side of the bed. Harold Decker was 65 years old, quiet as a library, and slow to anger in the way that only truly dangerous men can afford to be. Here's what else you need to know about Harold, and you need to remember this part because it becomes important later. He owned the lot at the end of Pinecrest Loop, number 14, just over a quarter-acre of cleared land that he'd bought in 2007 when the previous owner left town. He'd never built on it. He just kept the grass mowed and the property taxes paid, didn't talk about it much. It just sat there quiet at the end of the street, waiting. The moving truck arrived at number 12 on the 14th of February, 2019. Valentine's Day, which felt in hindsight like a dark joke. Two men in gray uniforms unloaded a collection of furniture that did not belong in a neighborhood like Pinecrest Loop. A white leather sectional sofa, a 6-foot wine refrigerator, a treadmill so expensive it had a touchscreen on it. All of it going into a 3-bedroom house that had been a pleasant, unremarkable home for 15 years under the Hutchins family, who had moved to be closer to grandchildren. The pearl white 2020 BMW X5 arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Courtney Bellum Whitfield stepped out of it in a cream-colored blazer, talking on her phone not to the movers, not acknowledging the neighbors who glanced over from their driveways. She was 38 years old, a digital marketing director who worked remotely and described herself on LinkedIn as a lifestyle entrepreneur. She had moved from Charlotte after what she called a fresh start, which her soon-to-be ex-husband's attorney might have called something different, but we'll get to that. Her hair was immaculate, her nails were done. Her yard, within 2 weeks, would have a sign on the mailbox that said BLLAMWHITFILD residence in a font that cost $40 from an online Etsy shop. Harold was on his porch when she pulled in. He raised a hand in a neighborly wave. Courtney looked through him like he was a speed bump. The first red flag came 3 days later. Harold's next-door neighbor, Eunice Park at number 13, knocked on Harold's door at 10:15 on a Thursday night. Courtney had been playing music since 9, not just music, curated playlist music, the kind with a heavy bass line that you feel in your fillings. Harold had been able to hear it through his bedroom wall. When Eunice mentioned it to Courtney the next morning, politely, with a smile, Courtney looked at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "This is a neighborhood," Courtney said, "not a retirement community." She went back inside. The music played again that night. And that was when Harold Decker began to pay attention. It was a Saturday in late March 2019. Harold was in his workshop when he heard his driveway alarm chime. He'd installed it years ago, a simple motion sensor, nothing fancy, wired to a small speaker inside his shop so he knew when a delivery arrived. He wiped the sawdust from his hands with a shop rag and walked to the front of the house. The BMW X5 was in his driveway. All the way in, not half in, not nose to the road. It was pulled in far enough that Harold couldn't get his 2014 Ford F-150 out without driving across his own lawn. Harold looked at the situation for about 15 seconds. Then he walked to number 12 and knocked. Courtney answered with her phone pressed to her ear. She held up one finger without making eye contact. Harold waited on the porch step for 2 full minutes. She finished her call, looked at him, and said, "What?" "Your car's in my driveway," Harold said. His voice was the same volume it always was, conversational, unhurried. "I need to get out. There was nowhere else to park. My people are coming over." "You're welcome to park on the street," Harold said, "or in your own driveway. My driveway's full. Listen, this'll just be a couple hours." Harold thought about this for a moment. "I have a doctor's appointment. So reschedule it." She closed the door. Harold stood there on her porch step for just a moment, not angry, not stunned, processing. He'd dealt with difficult people before. He'd dealt with considerably more difficult situations than this. He walked back to his house, went inside, and called a cab. He went to his doctor's appointment. He also made a note in a small green composition notebook he kept in his kitchen drawer. The kind of notebook you find at a dollar store. He wrote the date, the time, a description of what happened, and the license plate number of the BMW X5 7RGK 445, North Carolina. He'd learned that in the Corps, document everything. You never know what's going to matter later. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to be reasonable with someone who has absolutely no interest in being reasonable? That moment when you're standing there with your hand extended and they just look at it. If you've been through that, drop a comment and tell me about it. Because I know Harold wasn't the first person to knock on that door and he wasn't the last. But he was the only one keeping a notebook. Over the next 6 months, Courtney Bellum Whitfield made herself known on Pinecrest Loop. And not in the way that earns you a casserole. In April, trash bags appeared on the strip of grass between Harold's yard and Courtney's, not hers technically, but close enough. She'd missed trash day, and rather than roll her cans back up the driveway, she'd simply left 2 black garbage bags at what she considered the property line. In the morning heat, they split. Harold spent an hour cleaning it up. He put it in the notebook. In May, she filed a complaint with the Carteret County Neighborhood Covenant Office. Not the HOA, there wasn't one on Pinecrest Loop, but a county-level committee that handled property disputes. The complaint stated that Harold's flagpole was in violation of a zoning ordinance related to structures over 8 feet. The flagpole had been there for 19 years. A county inspector came out, looked at it, shook his head, and left. Harold put it in the notebook. In June, she backed her BMW into Harold's mailbox post, clipped it hard enough to crack the concrete base and snap the mailbox arm. She drove away without leaving a note. Harold had it on camera, a wise outdoor camera he put up in late April after the trash incident, wide-angle view of the entire front of his property. He put it in the notebook, date, time, 2 minutes of footage. In July, Courtney accused Harold's cat Corporal of defecating in her garden beds. Corporal was 12 years old and barely made it to the backyard anymore. Harold did not argue this point. He built a small decorative fence along his property line, low enough to see over, high enough to make the boundary clear. Courtney told him it was an eyesore. He thanked her for the feedback and went back inside. In August, someone keyed Harold's 2014 Ford F-150, ran something sharp along the entire driver's side, door handle to tailgate. The scratch was deep enough to need a body shop. Harold had no camera on his south side at that point. He installed one the next morning. And here's what you need to understand about Harold Decker at this point in the story. He was not a passive man, he was a patient one. There is a difference. Passive men endure because they don't know what else to do. Patient men endure because they are building towards something. Harold was building every entry in that green notebook, every camera, every date stamp photo. He was making a case file the way he'd been trained to do, methodically, without emotion, without urgency. He mentioned none of this to Courtney. He was perfectly polite whenever they crossed paths. He waved from his porch. He held the side gate open for her delivery driver. He was, by every outward appearance, a retired old man who'd made peace with his annoying neighbor. He had not made peace with anything. But what happened next, nobody expected. September 14, 2019. A cool Saturday morning, overcast, the kind of gray sky that means rain by afternoon. Harold was up at 4:30 as usual. He made his coffee, black, no sugar, and took it out to the porch while it was still dark. He sat in Margaret's chair because some mornings it helped. At 6:45, he walked down to the end of Pinecrest Loop to check on the lot he owned at number 14. He did this every 2 or 3 weeks just to make sure the grass was neat, make sure there was no dumping. The lot had a low chain-link gate at the front that Harold kept padlocked. The padlock was cut. He stood there, gate swinging open, looking at what had happened to his land. Courtney Bellum Whitfield had, at some point in the previous week, run 2 loads of filled dirt onto the far corner of his lot. There was a pile of crushed stone beside it. Survey stakes, orange-tipped ones, had been driven into the ground in a rough rectangle along the lot's eastern edge. And sitting against the chain-link fence like it belonged there was a roll of steel wire fencing, the kind you use to build a privacy enclosure. She was planning to build a storage area on his land. Harold crouched down and looked at the survey stakes. He pulled one out of the ground and held it in his hand for a long moment. He looked at the cut padlock on the fence. He looked at the roll of wire fencing. He looked at the filled dirt. Then he stood up, walked back to his house, went inside, and poured himself a second cup of coffee. He didn't call Courtney. He didn't knock on her door. He didn't touch anything on the lots. He called his old friend Lawrence Webb. Master Gunnery Sergeant Lawrence Webb, United States Marine Corps, retired, but also currently a licensed real estate attorney with a practice in Beaufort, North Carolina, who had been Harold's closest friend since 1979, when they'd been stationed together at 29 Palms, California. Lawrence answered on the second ring. "Lawrence," Harold said, "I need you to pull my deed on 401 Pinecrest Loop." "Morning to you too, Harold. You sound like you've been up a while." "Since 4:30, someone's been on my land." A pause. "Tell me everything," Lawrence said. "If you think Harold is going to let this slide, you don't know what it means to have a real estate attorney for a best friend. Stay with me." Here's what nobody knew at the time. And I mean nobody's, not Courtney, not the neighbors, not the fill dirt company she'd hired. Harold Decker didn't just own the lot at number 14, he owned the land that Courtney's driveway was built on. When Harold had purchased the lot in 2007, the county had conducted a full survey, standard procedure, and that survey had revealed something that the property records from the 1970s had obscured: an old boundary discrepancy between the Pinecrest Loop properties. When the original road was laid and the parcels were cut in 1969, the surveyor had made a small but significant error on the east side of the loop. Over decades, nobody had ever caught it or challenged it because nobody had reason to. But Harold had reason. He'd paid for a full title search in 2008, curious about it, and a licensed surveyor had confirmed it in writing. The eastern strip of what everyone assumed was Courtney's driveway, specifically the concrete from her garage apron to a point about 11 feet into her property line, sat on land that was legally part of Harold's lot. Not by a few inches, by 11 feet. Harold had known this for 11 years. He had never done anything with it, had no intention of doing anything with it. Margaret had said it seemed like something that could turn neighbors into enemies, and she was right. So he'd filed it away, in a folder in his filing cabinet between his discharge papers and his property insurance. But now someone had cut his padlock, had trespassed, had deposited material on his land without permission, had driven survey stakes into his earth, was planning to construct a structure on his property. And now Lawrence Webb was on the phone pulling records. "Harold," Lawrence said after he'd gone through the file, "you're looking at criminal trespass, criminal damage to property for the padlock, potentially tortious interference given the encroachment onto your land, and if she broke ground on that storage area, that's a whole separate conversation." "What about her driveway?" Harold asked. Silence on the line. Then, "What about it?" Harold told him about the 2008 survey. There was a longer silence. "Harold," Lawrence said slowly, "you've been sitting on this for 11 years. Margaret said not to borrow trouble. Margaret was a smart woman." "She was." "Well," Lawrence said, "she's not here now, and this woman cut your padlock." Harold looked out his kitchen window at the street, at the flagpole in his yard, at the two rocking chairs on the porch. "What do we do?" he asked. Lawrence told him. And that's when everything changed. "Now, while we're here, I need to ask you something. How long would you have waited before saying something, before acting? Drop a comment, because I've thought about this a lot. Some people would have been on the phone with a lawyer the first time the car blocked the driveway. Harold waited 6 months, which was exactly long enough to build an airtight case. It was a Tuesday morning in October 2019, October 22nd. Overcast again, the air carrying that first real bite of fall, the oaks on Pinecrest Loop going gold and russet at the tips. Harold was on his porch at 8 o'clock, coffee, Margaret's chair, corporal in his lap. At 8:17, a white county sheriff's deputy vehicle turned onto Pinecrest Loop and pulled to the curb. At 8:19, a second vehicle pulled behind it, a dark green SUV bearing the seal of the Carteret County Land Use and Code Enforcement Office. At 8:22, a third vehicle arrived, a red pickup truck with a magnetic sign on the door that read Coastal Survey Associates. 3 men got out with equipment. At 8:24, Lawrence Webb's silver Infiniti QX60 turned the corner and parked in front of Harold's house. Lawrence climbed out in a suit, navy, pressed, carrying a leather briefcase and a cardboard tube containing rolled documents. They all walked as a group to the end of Pinecrest Loop, to lot number 14. At 8:31, a process server knocked on the front door of number 12 Pinecrest Loop. Courtney Bellem Whitfield opened the door in a white bathrobe, a mug of coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. She had clearly not been awake long. She looked at the man on her porch with the expression of someone who had mistaken him for a DoorDash driver. He handed her a legal envelope. "Ms. Bellem Whitfield, you've been served." She looked at the envelope. "What is this?" "Civil complaint, ma'am, Decker v. Bellem Whitfield, filed in Carteret County Superior Court on October 18th. She looked past him. Down the street she could see the sheriff's vehicle, the code enforcement SUV, the 3 surveyors setting up equipment on the lot at the end of the road. she could see Lawrence Webb consulting a document with a county official. She looked to her left. She looked at Harold's porch. Harold was not looking at her. He was looking out at the street, coffee in hand, his old orange cat in his lap, rocking slowly. "What is going on?" she said. Her voice had a new quality to it. It was the question of someone who has suddenly realized they do not know something important. The process server tipped his chin down the road. "That's Harold Decker's lot, ma'am, and the survey crew is here to remark the boundary line per a court order obtained Friday." Harold Decker's lot. "And his driveway apron, ma'am, or 11 feet of yours, which is actually his." The color left her face. The surveyors drove stakes that morning. New stakes, orange tip just like hers, but these came with legal weight behind them. The county code enforcement officer issued a stop work order on the unpermitted storage construction before a single beam had been laid. The filled dirt Courtney had deposited on Harold's land was cited under County Ordinance 14.22, unauthorized placement of material on private property, carrying a fine of $1,200 per incident. There had been 2 truckloads. The complaint Lawrence had filed in Superior Court included the following claims: criminal trespass, property damage for the padlock, replacement and emotional damages, unauthorized material deposit, encroachment on recorded property easement, the 11-foot driveway strip, and a demand for quiet title on the disputed section. Total damages sought, $1,240,000. The number came from 3 sources: the surveyor's appraisal of the encroached land value, 3 years of potential rental income on the storage use she'd attempted to create, and the documented cost of repairs to Harold's mailbox, his F-150, and the padlock. All of it documented, all of it dated, all of it recorded on camera. 6 months of patience, sitting in a green composition notebook in a kitchen drawer. All of it now stapled to a legal complaint with Harold Decker's signature at the bottom. He finished his coffee. By 9 that morning, 3 neighbors were standing in their driveways. By 9:30 it was 7. Nobody said much. They watched the surveyor's work. They watched the code enforcement officer take photos of the filled dirt. They watched the deputy speak quietly with Lawrence Webb and nod repeatedly. Eunice Park from number 13 walked up to Harold's porch around 9:45. She handed him a plate with 2 slices of banana bread wrapped in foil. "I made it this morning," she said. Harold thanked her and put it on the side table without looking at it. At number 12, the lights went on in 3 rooms, then off, then on again. The blinds were down. The BMW X5 stayed in the driveway all morning, nowhere to be suddenly. Nobody from number 12 came outside. At noon, a flatbed truck arrived, and under the supervision of the code enforcement officer and a notarized removal order, carried away the filled dirt and the crushed stone. It took 45 minutes. Harold watched it from his porch. He didn't get up. By 2 in the afternoon, the street had gone quiet the way Pinecrest Loop was supposed to be quiet. Sprinklers, wind in the oak trees, someone's screen door 2 houses down. Harold went inside, washed his coffee cup, and went to his workshop. He had a name sign he'd promised to the Garza grandchildren before Thanksgiving. Maple, good grain on it. He wanted to get the routing done before the light changed. The composure of that, I want you to sit with that for a moment. This man had just triggered a $1.24 million lawsuit against his neighbor. A lawsuit with a strong chance of victory. He'd watched federal documentation crews and sheriffs roll down his street like a quiet tide, and he went to his workshop to make a child's name sign. That is not a man who acts out of anger. That is a man who acts out of principle. Courtney Bellam Whitfield retained an attorney in Wilmington. He reviewed the case and reportedly told her the survey evidence was significant, which is attorney language for "you are in trouble." Her counterclaim that the survey records were disputed failed at the first motion hearing in February 2020. The 2008 survey Lawrence had commissioned was accepted as authoritative. The court found that the 11-foot strip did belong to Harold. In March 2020, the case entered mediation. Courtney's legal team made an initial offer of $40,000. Harold, through Lawrence, declined. In August 2020, after a second round of mediation, the parties reached a settlement. The exact terms were sealed. What was not sealed was the recorded deed adjustment. Courtney Bellum Whitfield formally quitclaimed the 11-foot strip back to Harold Decker, and in exchange, Harold granted her a permanent access easement over it so her driveway remained functional. The financial settlement, sources close to the case noted at the time, included a substantial payment that covered Harold's legal fees plus additional damages. Harold never confirmed the number publicly. Lawrence Webb, in a conversation with a neighbor who told another neighbor who told Eunice Park, said simply, "Harold did fine." What happened to Courtney afterward? The BMW X5 was gone by January 2021. A moving truck arrived on a cold Wednesday. It took 3 hours. Nobody on Pinecrest Loop came outside to watch it go. Not because they didn't care, but because they'd decided collectively that she didn't deserve a goodbye. Number 12 sold in February 2021 to a family named Torres, 2 parents, 3 kids, a chocolate Labrador. The youngest Torres kid, a 7-year-old named Rosario, knocked on Harold's door the first week they moved in and asked if he could show her the flagpole. He showed her how to fold the flag, how to hold it tight at the corners, how to make the triangle. She practiced 3 times and got it right. Harold carved a name sign for her that Christmas. Rosario, painted in red and gold. She put it on her bedroom door, and it was still there the last time Eunice Park saw it years later. The lot at number 14, Harold kept it. He mowed it. He replaced the padlock. He planted a row of crepe myrtles along the back edge that bloomed pink every June. Margaret had always liked crepe myrtles. And as for the green composition notebook, it's in the filing cabinet, between the discharge papers and the insurance documents, right where it belongs. You know, folks, I've told a lot of these stories, and people always ask me the same thing. Why didn't Harold just call a lawyer at the beginning? Why wait? I've thought about that. And I think the answer is this: Harold Decker wasn't waiting. He was watching. He was learning. He was letting the other person reveal themselves fully, the way a patient man does, because a patient man knows that time is on the side of the one who can afford to be quiet. Courtney Bellum Whitfield made a series of escalating choices. Each one left a mark in a little green notebook. Each one went into a file. And when she finally crossed the line that could not be crossed, when she put her stakes in his ground and cut his padlock like his ownership of that land was a minor inconvenience, she handed him everything he needed. She built the case against herself. Harold just kept the notebook. So here's what I want you to take from this story tonight. Never mistake a quiet man for an easy mark. Never confuse patience with surrender. And if you ever find yourself looking at a calm, unhurried man who doesn't rise to your provocations, take a step back and ask yourself, what does he know that you don't? Harold Decker served 26 years in the United States Marine Corps. He raised a flag every day of his adult life. He carved name signs for children and helped strangers move furniture in the July heat. He loved a woman deeply and lost her and kept her rocking chair on the porch, because love doesn't just stop because someone is gone. He was not a man you could push around. He was a man you should have introduced yourself to, properly, with a handshake. As for the flag, it still goes up at sunrise on Pinecrest Loop, still comes down at dusk. And the street is still and quiet and smells like honeysuckle in the summer. The way it was always supposed to be. Good night, folks. Take care of your neighbors and take care of each other. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.